You've seen it 1,000 times. Some guy in a rented Lamborghini tells you that the only reason you are not rich is because you don't want it badly enough. A podcast host with a $20 million net worth tells you to just start. A motivational clip goes viral. Some billionaire saying poverty is a mindset, that success is simply the result of hard work and taking risk. And maybe part of you believe it, or maybe you worked your ass off for years and wondered why it wasn't working. Or maybe, like a lot of people, you just felt this quiet shame, like you were failing at something that was supposed to be simple. Here's the truth, that entire framework is built on a lie, and today we're going to take it apart piece by piece. Let's start with the most fundamental problem in all of entrepreneurship advice, survivorship bias. Here's what that means. Imagine there are 1,000 people. They all read the same books, watch the same hustle culture videos, wake up at 5 a.m., take risks, grind relentlessly, believe in themselves. Of those 1,000 people, maybe 10 become genuinely wealthy. Now, here's the question. Who do we hear from? The 10 who made it. They got on podcasts, they write books, they get interviewed. They say, I worked hard, I took risks, I believed in myself. And it paid off. And that's true for them. But what about the 990 others? They did the same things, they worked just as hard, they took risks too. Many of them lost everything. Savings, relationships, year of their lives. But nobody's interviewed them. Nobody's watching their TikToks. They are just invisible. This is survivorship bias. We only analyze the winners, and then we build a false theory of success from their starts, completely ignoring the massive graveyard of people who followed the same advice and it didn't work. The planes that returned from World War II had bullet holes in the wings. The military initially wanted to reinforce the wings, but statistician Abraham Wald pointed out the rift inside. Those planes made it back despite the wing hits. The planes that were shot down, the ones they never saw, were likely hit in the engines. The data was missing the most important cases. Entrepreneurship advice has the same problem. We're only ever studying the planes that came back. There is a recent debate clip where an entrepreneur named Ben Scales lays this out almost perfectly, without meaning to. In the debate, he explains that he worked for years without seeing results. Eventually, it clicked. He started making around 10K a month and stacked up 40-50K before dropping out. That story is real. That effort is real. But here's what we don't see. We don't see the people who also worked 3 or 4 years and never broke through. We don't see the ones who burned savings, next credit cards, and quietly went back to jobs without the podcast in mind. We hear from the one who made it out of the valley. We don't hear from the hundreds who stayed in it. Effort matters, but effort is not a filter, not a guarantee. Second big lie is this idea that taking risk is simply a choice available to everyone. Just take the leap, burn the boats, go all in. Easy advice to give when you have a safety net. Almost impossible advice to follow when you don't. Think about what taking the risk actually requires. It requires being able to survive failure. If you quit your job to start a business and it fails after 18 months, what happens to you? For some people with family wealth, a partner with stable income, parents they can move back in with, or savings built over the years, failure is painful but survivable. You dust yourself off and try again. For others, failure means eviction. It means your kids don't eat. It means medical debt with no insurance. For these people, taking a risk isn't both entrepreneurship, it's gambling with everything they have and no house to go home if they lose. Research backs this up. Studies have consistently found that one of the strongest predictors of entrepreneurial success isn't passion or hustle or mindset, it's access to starting capital. And where does starting capital usually come from? Family. Parents who can lend money, relatives who can co-sign loans, generational wealth that cushions the fall. A 2019 analysis found that children from the top income quintile were dramatically more likely to become entrepreneurs and to have those businesses survive compared to children from lower income backgrounds. Not because they worked harder, because they started with more. In that same debate, Ben Scales is speaking to a mechanic who has $40 left for the week, supports his mother, has a baby on the way, and wakes up at 3 a.m. for work. Now compare risk positions. Ben Scales says that before he dropped out, he had stacked 40-50K from online work. He also mentions that his parents did averagely well and always put food on the table. That doesn't invalidate his grind. He earned that money. But it does change the downside equation. If he failed, he reset. If the mechanic fails, a family destabilizes. Those are not equal risks. That's not mindset. That's runaway. When a wealthy entrepreneur tells you to take the leap, they are often telling you to do something that was low risk for them and high risk for you. That's not wisdom. That's the failure to understand their own privilege. Here's one that should be obvious, but somehow gets ignored every single time. If hard work was the primary driver of wealth, subsistence farmers in developing countries would be among the richest people in the world. They're not. A garment worker in Bangladesh who stitches 14 hours a day works harder physically, relentlessly, than almost any tech founder who talks about their 60-hour weeks from a co-working space in Austin. Hard work is necessary. It is not sufficient. And the reason that's uncomfortable for successful people to acknowledge is that it would mean their success was entirely earned. It would mean luck, timing, network, geography, and 100 other factors outside their control played a massive role. Economists who study inequality have made this exact point. Effort is everywhere. Capital, opportunity, and timing are not. The tech founders who got rich in the late 90s weren't necessarily smarter or more hardworking than the ones who started 3 years later and went bankrupt in a dot-com crash. They were in the right place at the right moment in history. This isn't an argument against working hard. Work hard? Absolutely. But let's be honest about what hard work does and doesn't guarantee. It improves your odds, it does not determine your outcome. There's another layer to this that almost nobody in hustle culture talks about: neurodiversity, specifically ADHD. I'm not officially diagnosed yet and planning to get evaluated soon, but I've looked at the clinical criteria, I've read the research, and most of the symptoms have been there since childhood. The attention swings, the hyperfocus, the difficulty with sustained consistency, the crash after the excitement fades. It's not new, it's a pattern. And if you have ADHD, diagnosed or not, most mainstream entrepreneur advice is not just unhelpful. It's structurally incompatible with how your brain works. Hustle culture runs on one assumption, that consistency is primarily a discipline problem. Just stay consistent, just push through, just want it more. But ADHD isn't about wanting things less. It's about how the brain regulates dopamine, motivation, and executive function. Research shows ADHD brains struggle with task initiation, long-term reward tracking, and sustaining interest in low-stimulation activities, even when the person genuinely cares about the outcome. That's not laziness, that's neurology. I grew up in a lower middle income family. We always had enough to survive. We could save a little, but there was no safety net for big risk, no capital to burn, no cushion for repeated failure. So when I consumed all this entrepreneurship content, I believed it. I thought, this is my way out. I built websites fully with AI, plus the programming knowledge I picked up in school. I set up affiliate marketing systems. I tried to optimize funnels. I learned just enough to make everything functional. And every time, the same thing happened. I would hyper-focus while building it. Hours would disappear. I would feel unstoppable. Then once the site was done, once the novelty was gone, my brain just detached. The interest dropped. The consistency collapsed. I just couldn't make myself maintain it, market it properly, or keep iterating long enough to see results. It wasn't one failure, it was a pattern. I tried again. Tried freelance, different projects, same outcome. And the worst part wasn't the failure, it was the narrative in my head. Because hustle culture doesn't say, maybe your brain needs a different structure. It says, you didn't want it badly enough, so you internalize it. You think you're lazy, weak, undisciplined, broken, but here's the reality. ADHD brains are interest-driven, not importance-driven. They thrive in urgency, novelty, or high stimulation, and struggle with slow, delayed reward systems like SEO growth, affiliate marketing scaling, or long-term brand building. The typical online business model requires sustained, low dopamine consistency before reward show up. That's almost the worst-case environment for someone with untreated ADHD. And when you combine that with limited financial runaway, no big savings, no family capital, the margin for inconsistency disappears. This is why blanket advice is dangerous. Because when someone says, if you're in a very first world country and not rich, it's your fault. They're assuming everyone has the same cognitive wiring, the same executive function, the same risk tolerance, the same dopamine regulation. They don't. Some people are fighting economic constraints. Some are fighting neurological ones. Some are fighting both. And telling those people to just grind harder isn't motivating. It's gaslighting. Now we get to the most insidious part of the hustle culture narrative. The idea that your financial position is purely on result of your personal choices. Rich people make rich choices. Poor people make poor choices. This framing is not just wrong, it's harmful. And it exists largely because it's useful. Useful to people who already have wealth and don't want to examine how systems and structures contribute to inequality. Let's talk about what choice actually looks like under different conditions. When you grow up in a neighborhood without good schools, you don't choose that. When your parents couldn't build credit because of decades of discriminatory lending practices, you didn't choose the financial disadvantage you inherited. When the industry you worked in gets automated away, you didn't choose that either. When a health crisis wipes out your savings, that wasn't a bad choice. That was a system that doesn't protect people from catastrophic medical costs. Behavioral economists have done fascinating research on how poverty itself impairs decision-making. Not because poor people are less capable, but because making high-stakes decisions under constant scarcity depletes cognitive bandwidth. When you are worried about how you are going to pay rent, your brain literally has fewer resources available to plan for the long term. The system creates conditions that make good choices harder, and then blames individuals for not making them. The choice framework is also used selectively. When wealthy people inherit money, benefit from tax advantages, get bailed out, or build businesses on public infrastructure, we call that smart. When working class people fall behind, we say they made bad choices. The intellectual inconsistency should be obvious. None of this means individuals have zero agency. Of course, choices matter, but choices exist within constraints, and those constraints are not distributed equally. In the debate, Ben Scales repeatedly frames wealth as almost entirely personal responsibility. At one point, he argues that if you are in a first world country and you are not rich, it's your fault. That framing feels empowering. It sounds strong, but it collapses economic complexity into moral judgment. There's a difference between saying you have agency and saying if you are not succeeding, it's because you're defective. When we turn financial outcomes into character evaluations, we stop analyzing structure entirely. And that's where the narrative becomes dangerous. So, if this narrative is so flawed, why does it keep spreading? Why do millions of people watch, share, and believe it? A few reasons. First, it's emotionally compelling. The idea that success is entirely within your control is inspiring. It gives people hope. It feels empowering to believe that your future is completely in your hands. And that feeling is genuinely valuable, even when the underlying theory is wrong. Second, successful people genuinely believe it. Most wealthy entrepreneurs are not lying consciously. They work hard, they took risks, and they succeeded. So they naturally attribute their success to those things. The human brain is wired to see causation where there is mostly correlation, and to underweight luck and circumstance in our personal narratives. To be fair, Ben Scales is right about something important. Many people do quit too early. Many people avoid risk entirely. Many people underestimate what they are capable of. Agency matters, but agency without structural awareness turns into arrogance. And structural awareness without agency turns into paralysis. The truth lives in the tension between the two. Third, it serves the ideology. A world where success is purely individual means inequality is purely deserved. That's a very convenient story if you're wealthy and don't want to engage with questions about taxation, wages, or systemic reform. And fourth, the content algorithm rewards, hustle content performs. It gets clicks, shares, and comments. You're being held back by systems that predate your birth. It's not a video that goes viral at 2 a.m. So, what's the alternative? Is the message just give up, nothing matters? No, absolutely not. Here's what actually moves the needle based on research than anecdote. Networks matter more than hustle. Study after study shows that who you know and who knows you is a stronger predictor of career and business outcomes than raw effort. This doesn't mean smooth your way to the top. It means invest in genuine relationships. Seek out communities where people share resources. Build real connections in the field you want to work in. skills, and timing compound. Developing a specific, valuable skill set and positioning yourself in a growing field matters enormously. This is one place where deliberate choices do make a real difference. Not grind harder, but develop something specific that market increasingly values: financial literacy under realistic conditions. Not invest in index funds and advice directed at people living paycheck to paycheck, but honest information about debt, how credit works, how to build a small emergency fund, how to avoid the traps that disproportionately target people without financial education. Structural changes are not your enemy. Policies like minimum wage increases, student loan reform, healthcare access, and affordable housing are not handouts. They are the floor that makes individual effort actually viable. Countries with stronger social safety nets tend to have higher rates of entrepreneurship, not lower, because people can take real risks when failure won't destroy them. The hustle myth doesn't just fail people intellectually, it actively harms them. It makes people who are struggling feel like failures when they should feel angry. It directs blame inward at individuals when it should be directed outward at structures and systems. You are not poor because you didn't want it badly enough. You are not stuck because you haven't found the right morning routine. The game has real rules, and those rules were not written equally. It means you deserve honest information about the actual terrain, not a motivational poster designed to sell your course. Work hard, build skills, take smart risks when you can afford to, but stop blaming yourself for a game with unequal starting positions. And stop listening to people who survived high-risk bets, pretending the risk didn't matter. If this hit something real for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments, what's the most damaging piece of hustle culture advice you have ever been given?